Welcome back. Hello friend, about 85% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you also don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comment. I was deep in the woods of Russia, far from anything I knew. I had been hiking for days, going deeper into the thick forest where the trees seemed to block out the sky. The ground was soft with moss, and everything felt damp and heavy. The air smelled like wet dirt and pine. I didn't have any phone signal, no map, and no idea where I was. I thought I could follow a path, but it had disappeared hours ago. The further I went, the weirder things felt. It was way too quiet. There were no birds, no wind in the trees, not even the usual sounds of animals moving around. Just dead silence, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, keeping track of every step I took. I kept telling myself it was just in my head, but I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. As the sun started to go down, I knew I had to find a place to stop for the night. I came across a small open area, the first break in the thick trees I'd seen in hours. Something about it felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there. But I was exhausted, so I set up my tent, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling building in my gut. Night came fast and the temperature dropped. The forest was completely dark, with just the outlines of trees against the night sky. I laid down in my tent, trying to sleep, but every little sound outside seemed louder, like it was getting closer. The leaves rustling felt way too close for comfort. Couldn't sleep. I just laid there, listening, feeling the silence push down on me. Then I heard it, a soft crunch of leaves, then another. Something was moving outside my tent. It wasn't the wind or some random animal. It was too slow, too careful. I held my breath, listening as it walked around my tent. I could hear it brushing against the sides, moving closer to the entrance. My heart was beating so hard it hurt, and I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't move. I didn't want to make a sound. The footsteps stopped right at the zipper of the tent. There was no noise, just the sound of breathing, slow and steady, like someone standing just inches away from me. I laid there, frozen, not moving a muscle for what felt like hours. After a while, the footsteps slowly moved away, getting quieter until there was nothing but silence again. I stayed awake the entire night, too scared to do anything. When the sun finally came up, I unzipped the tent, expecting to see something or someone waiting for me. But there was nothing, just the cold morning air. That's when I saw the footprints. They were all around the tent, big enough to be from a person, but barefoot, no shoes, just bare feet. They circled my tent, then led back into the thick woods. I knew I couldn't stay there another night. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking the whole time. I tried to follow the path I thought I had come from, hoping it would lead me out. But the forest didn't seem the same anymore. The trees looked bigger, the woods felt darker, and the quiet was heavier. No matter how far I walked, I couldn't find my way out. Hours passed, then a whole day, but I was still lost in that maze of trees. That's when it hit me. Whatever had been outside my tent that night wasn't just passing by. It had been waiting, watching, and now I was exactly where it wanted me. I kept walking, but the feeling only got worse. The sun was starting to set again. My legs felt like they were giving out, but the trees kept closing in. I looked down at the ground and saw more of those bare footprints, fresh ones, like they had just been made. But there were no sounds. I wasn't alone out there, and I was never going to leave that forest. It already decided that. I've been a ranger for nearly 10 years now, working in some of the most far-out parts of the country. I'm used to long stretches of quiet, hearing the wind in the trees, and catching sight of animals darting through the brush. The deeper you go into the woods, the less you see or hear from people. That's always been my favorite part of the job. Just me and the wilderness. But this time it wasn't the same. About 3 months ago, we got a report of a hiker who went missing deep in a forest that almost no one visits. The trails there aren't kept up much anymore and are only used by serious hikers. When they gave me the case, I wasn't worried at first. People get lost all the time, especially when they go off the trail. But there was something about this one that felt off from the start. The guy had been out there for almost a week before anyone noticed he was missing. The moment I stepped onto the trail, I felt uneasy, like something wasn't right. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just because I was alone. The forest can do that to you sometimes. But the farther I went in, the stronger that feeling got. After 2 days of searching, I found his campsite, or what was left of it. His tent was ripped apart and scattered all over the place. It didn't look like any animal had done it, though. The tier was too clean, not the kind you'd expect from a bear or a mountain lion. His gear was still there too, untouched. It didn't make sense. If it had been an animal, they'd have taken the food, dragged something away. But everything was left like he just disappeared. I radioed in, told them I'd found the site, but no sign of the guy. I decided to keep looking, thinking maybe he wandered off. As the day wore on, the forest around me felt wrong. The usual sounds were gone. No birds, no breeze, just this heavy, crushing silence that made the back of my neck prickle. I kept walking, heading deeper into the woods, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really alone. Night fell and I set up camp. I made a small fire, trying to push away the growing sense of dread. Every little noise made me jump, and I couldn't shake the idea that something was watching me. It was silly, I knew that, but it felt like there were eyes on me from all sides. At some point, I fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion. I don't know how long I was out before I woke up to the sound of branches snapping nearby. My heart was racing as I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the woods. But there was nothing there. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer. But after that, I couldn't sleep again. The next morning, I packed up and kept going. By this point, I was starting to think I'd never find him. Maybe it was just another case where someone wandered too far and got lost for good. I was close to calling it in when I saw it. A small clearing up ahead, near a stream. At first, it looked normal. But then I saw something out of place, footprints. Fresh human footprints, leading right toward the water. I followed them, my heart pounding in my chest. They went straight to the edge of the stream, then stopped. No sign of anyone falling in, no tracks leading away. It was like they just disappeared into thin air. I stood there for a long time trying to make sense of it. But the forest was still so quiet, too quiet. Something was wrong, I could feel it. As I turned to leave, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A dark shape just behind the trees. I looked right at it, but there was nothing there. I picked up my pace, trying not to let my mind race. But every few steps, I felt it again. Something was watching me. Something was following me. The air felt thick and heavy, like the trees were pressing in closer, like the forest itself was trying to trap me. I don't scare easily, but by the time I got back to my camp, I was on edge. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I just sat by the fire, staring into the dark, waiting for something to come out of the trees. But nothing did. The first light, I packed up and left. I reported the search as a failure. I've done plenty of searches since then, but I've never gone back to that part of the forest. Something is out there, and it's not just a lost hiker or some animal. It's something that doesn't belong, something the forest hides. I don't know what happened to that guy, but I do know one thing: whatever's out there is still watching, still waiting, and I don't think it wants to be found. I I didn't think I'd end up deep in the South American forest with my uncle and his friend, Anna. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, something my uncle did all the time. He had this strange need to get far away from the city, and Anna seemed just as into it. I didn't know much about her, but she seemed like she could handle herself. We set up camp far from any road, surrounded by thick trees and a kind of silence that didn't feel right. The trees were so close together that barely any sunlight came through. It wasn't a place I'd choose to be, but I trusted my uncle. He had been here many times before. The first day went by fine. We hiked, gathered wood, and set up camp. It was peaceful, but the air felt strange, like something was off. Maybe it was just me being on edge from being in a place I didn't know. My uncle didn't seem worried, so I tried to let it go. The next day, we decided to hike even deeper into the woods. My uncle wanted to show us a spot he found on another trip. The path wasn't clear, and soon, it seemed like the trail just disappeared. I felt uneasy, but my uncle and Anna stayed calm, so I kept quiet. Hours passed as we moved deeper into the forest. The farther we went, the harder it was to move through the trees. The brush was thick, and we weren't on any trail anymore, just walking straight into the middle of nowhere. The sun started to go down, and I could feel the fear building. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to seem scared. Finally, we stopped in a small open space, trees towering over us. My uncle said we'd camp there for the night. We set up the tents quickly as the light faded. The air felt heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. That night felt like it lasted forever. I lay in my tent, listening to the forest. Every little snap of a branch or rustling leaves made my heart race. It had to be animals, I thought. But then I heard something else. Something heavier, moving slowly outside the tent. It wasn't a small animal, it was bigger. The sound stopped right outside my tent, and there was silence for what felt like hours. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I was too scared to look outside. Eventually, the sound faded, and I must have fallen asleep from being so tired. The next morning, I stepped outside, and everything seemed normal. My uncle and Anna were already packing up, but I could see on their faces that they heard it too. No one said anything, but we all knew. It was time to leave. We hiked back in silence. The path we came in on was hard to find, and I started feeling like we were walking in circles. The deeper we went, the more I felt like something was closing in on us. My uncle and Anna were walking faster now, more focused. They seemed to understand that we needed to get out of there, and fast. Hours passed, and I started to wonder if we were lost. The forest around us seemed darker, the trees more twisted than before. The deeper we went, the more I realized my uncle didn't know the way out. He kept stopping, looking around, changing direction. After a while, it became clear we were just wandering with no idea where to go. By the time the sun began to set again, the fear in me was almost unbearable. We had no choice but to set up camp again, deeper in the woods than before. The air felt even heavier, and the forest was quieter than it should have been. The sounds around us had changed. It wasn't just the usual noises of animals anymore. There was something else out there, moving, watching us. That night, it happened again. The noise outside the tent. Heavy footsteps, slow, moving closer and closer. This time, they didn't stop. I heard the zipper on Anna's tent, her hurried steps, and then the loud snap of branches breaking. Then, nothing. Silence. Morning came and Anna was gone. There was no sign of her anywhere. My uncle didn't say a word. He just grabbed his things and started walking. I followed, too afraid to ask what had happened. We walked all day without stopping. No breaks, no talking. Just walking. The trees seemed to close in on us, and the shadows grew longer as the day went on. It felt like we were never going to get out of there. Finally, We broke through the trees and stumbled onto a dirt road. I've never felt more relieved in my life. But even as we stood there, safe, the weight of the forest stayed with me. We never spoke about Anna or what happened that night, but the look in my uncle's eyes said it all. He knew exactly what had happened, but he wasn't going to say it. Something was out there in the forest with us. Something that knew the woods better than we ever could. And I had a feeling it wasn't done with us yet. We may have made it out, but I couldn't shake the thought that whatever was out there knew where to find us. We were deep in the woods, far from any town or road. The sun was starting to go down, and long shadows stretched through the trees. My legs were sore from walking all day, and the air was thick and sticky, making it feel like I was breathing through a wet towel. I was part of a police team, looking for a dangerous man who had been on the run for weeks. People thought he was hiding out in these woods. There were 4 of us spread out searching the area. The deeper we went, the more the trees seemed to close in on us. The trees were tall and packed close together, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Every noise seemed louder, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and the steady buzz of bugs. We knew the man was armed. The briefing earlier told us he was desperate and violent. He had already killed 2 officers during his escape, and no one knew what he might do if we found him. My nerves were shot. Every now and then, I thought I saw something moving in the shadows, but it was always just the wind or some animal. Hours went by, and the daylight was almost gone. The woods were dark now, but we couldn't stop searching. We couldn't let him get away again. I turned on my flashlight, the small beam cutting through the dark, but it only made the shadows feel closer, like they were creeping in on me. Then, out of nowhere, I saw movement ahead. It was more than just the wind this time. I froze and pointed my light in the direction, my heart pounding hard in my chest. For a moment, I thought it was him, but as I got closer, I saw it was a tent, a rough camp set up between a group of thick trees. I crouched down, trying to stay quiet. The tent looked old, like it had been there for a while, but I saw fresh footprints in the dirt. Whoever was here was still close. I scanned the area with my light, but didn't see anyone. The air was so still, that deep, heavy silence that only comes in the woods at night. I moved toward the tent slowly, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I pulled back the flap and found a few things: an old knife, some canned food, and a map. The map had lines all over it, showing trails and spots he might have been planning to go. I stepped back, that strange feeling that I was being watched creeping up on me. That's when I noticed something else. There were no sounds. The woods had gone completely silent. No bugs, no wind, nothing. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I turned around, expecting him to be right behind me. But no one was there. Still, the feeling of being hunted was strong, like I was no longer the one looking for him. He was looking for me. I had to get back to the others, tell them what I found, and regroup. I tried to radio in, but all I got was static. The signal wasn't working this deep in the woods. That sinking feeling hit me hard. I wasn't just searching for a dangerous man anymore. I was the one being chased. I started backing away from the camp, trying to move as quietly as I could. I didn't know where he was, but I knew he had the advantage. He knew these woods better than me. Just as I began to leave, I heard a soft crunch behind me. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping through the trees, but there was no one. My heart was racing, and my whole body felt tight. I moved faster this time, stumbling over roots and branches in the dark. Every noise felt like it was him, getting closer, ready to grab me. No matter how fast I moved, the feeling of him being right behind me never left. By the time I made it back to the trail where we started, I was covered in sweat, breathing hard. I didn't stop until I was far enough away, back near the vehicles. The others came back eventually, but the fugitive was never found. He was still out there, somewhere in the dark, hiding. It's been weeks now, but I can't stop thinking about those woods. I still feel it sometimes, that feeling of being watched, of knowing someone dangerous was right behind me, just out of sight. I haven't gone back since, but sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the right moment. The worst part? I think he's not just hiding anymore. I think he's watching. Not the woods this time, not some random cop. Watching me. It's been getting harder to sleep, but I keep hearing that sound. A soft crunch of leaves, always just outside my window. I've lived next to Dave and his wife Laura for a while. They were nice enough, but we didn't talk much. Just the usual wave or nod when we saw each other. They seemed to love the outdoors, always walking out into the woods behind our houses. One day, Dave asked me to come with them. I thought, sure, why not? It would be good to get out and walk around. The path we took wasn't one I had seen before. It was narrow and twisted deeper into the trees than I was used to. I wasn't comfortable going so far out, but Dave seemed to know where we were headed. The air felt colder the deeper we went, and the trees got thicker. After a while, the path disappeared altogether, but Dave and Laura kept walking like they knew exactly where they were going. I followed, but I started feeling uneasy. Eventually, we reached a small open space. Nothing really stood out, just trees surrounding us. But something about it felt off. It was way too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you shouldn't be there. Dave and Laura walked right up to a big flat rock, like they had been there before. They didn't say anything, just stood there, like they were waiting for something. I stood back, watching them. Their movements seemed strange, like they had done this many times before. That's when I noticed the ground. It didn't look right. The dirt around the rock looked like it had been dug up recently. My stomach started to twist. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad had happened here before. I kept thinking, why would anyone come this far off the trail? What were they doing out here? Dave and Laura just stood there, staring at the ground, waiting. It was creepy, and I decided I had to leave. I made up some reason to go back home. Inside, I was getting really nervous, my heart racing. They didn't stop me, just gave me a nod like they didn't care. The whole walk back, I couldn't stop thinking about that spot. The dug-up ground, the way they were acting. It didn't sit right with me. When I got home, I locked my doors, but I couldn't get the feeling out of my head. The next day, I did something I shouldn't have. I went back alone. I found the clearing again easily, and that same flat rock. I walked up to it, looking around. That's when I saw it. A small shovel, half buried under some leaves, like someone had tried to hide it. The dirt around the rock looked even more messed up, like someone had been digging again. My stomach sank. Then, I smelled something faint, something awful. It was the kind of smell that sticks with you, the smell of death. I didn't think twice. I ran. My legs felt weak, my chest tight, but I didn't stop. When I finally made it home, I locked every door and window. I haven't seen Dave or Laura since that day. Their house has been dark. No movement. Nothing. But at night, I hear strange sounds coming from the woods. I know something's out there. Something they were hiding. Last night, I saw a light flickering deep in the trees. It was coming from where that rock is. I don't know who's out there now, but I'm not going to find out. All I know is that whatever they buried didn't stay down. I had been walking for hours, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and pine trees. The trail seemed endless, and the deeper I went into the woods, the quieter it became. The wind had completely stopped, and there was no sound, no rustling of leaves, nothing. It felt strange, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Then the rain hit out of nowhere. At first, it was just a few drops, but within minutes, it turned into a full downpour. I didn't have a rain jacket, and the trail was already turning into mud. My boots, which had been doing fine up until now, started slipping in the thickening muck. The cold water ran down my neck, and I could feel my skin tightening as the temperature dropped. I looked at my map, but the trail had turned into a mess of rain and trees. There was no sign of anyone else, no other hikers, no sounds of the outside world. It felt like I had wandered off the map into a place no one could reach. My heart started racing. This mountain was bigger than I had thought, and I didn't realize how easy it was to get lost. I kept walking, hoping to find some shelter, but the rain made everything look the same. Wet trees, slippery rocks, muddy ground. I couldn't tell if I was going in circles or moving forward. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, it felt like the woods were closing in on me. I tried to look at the map again, but it was too wet and useless now. I felt my thoughts getting jumbled, but all I could hear was the rain, the trees creaking with the weight of it. Hours passed. I was soaked, freezing, and my clothes clung to my skin. I thought about turning back, but I couldn't even remember which way I had come from. The woods seemed to be pushing in around me, trapping me here. A cold feeling crawled up my spine, and my stomach twisted with panic. I was alone, lost, and I had no idea how to get out. That's when I heard it. A noise coming from behind me. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it sounded too deliberate, too heavy. I froze, trying to listen. The noise came closer. It wasn't an animal, I could tell. It was too heavy, too slow. My heart slammed in my chest as I turned, and that's when I saw it. A figure moving between the trees, just outside the reach of the rain. I stood completely still, not able to move, not able to think. My whole body was frozen with fear, and every part of me screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure didn't seem to notice me. It just walked, slowly, deliberately, between the trees, moving deeper into the woods. It wasn't running, it wasn't hurrying, just walking. I should have run, but I couldn't. I just stood there, watching, my breath caught in my throat. Then, just like that, it was gone. Vanished. No sound, no movement, just the steady beat of the rain. I waited, straining to hear anything else, but everything was silent again. My heart was still pounding, and the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Slowly, I started moving, still feeling the eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I walked for what felt like hours more, the rain still falling, but nothing else moved in the woods. Eventually, I saw a small clearing ahead. I staggered into it, and there, in the middle of the clearing, was a cabin. It was old, the roof sagging and the windows boarded up, but it was shelter. I approached slowly, uncertain if it was safe, but at that point I didn't care. I needed to get out of the rain. The door creaked open easily, like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was stale but dry. I collapsed on the floor, too tired to move, shivering from the cold. I didn't want to go outside again, so I stayed there watching the door, listening. The rain continued to beat on the roof, but the silence of the woods around the cabin was unnerving. I didn't dare open the door again, not even to peek outside. I kept my senses sharp, my mind racing, but nothing happened. I waited there, the night stretching on, too scared to fall asleep. By morning, the rain had stopped. The woods outside were quiet, too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I left the cabin, moving slowly, still on edge. As I walked back down the trail, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, quick and fleeting, but I couldn't be sure. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the trees swaying in the wind. When I finally found the main trail again, I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I was alone. The whole time, as I walked back down, the woods felt like they were watching me, waiting. By the time I reached the base of the mountain, I saw a group of hikers, and for a brief moment I felt relief. But that feeling didn't last. As I got into my car and started driving away, I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, anything. But the road behind me was empty. The woods were still. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been following me. Maybe it was still watching me, even now as I drove away. Some things in those woods should never be found. And some places you should never go back to. I was about 12 years old when my dad took me on a weekend trip to my grandparents' cabin deep in the woods. We'd been there before, but this time it felt different. The air was thick with the smell of pine, and the ground was soft and wet from the rain, making a squishy sound under our boots. Dad and I were the only ones at the cabin this weekend. My grandparents were away for a few days, so it was just the two of us, alone in that quiet, faraway place. The cabin was old with floors that creaked and windows that didn't shut all the way. But I didn't mind. It felt peaceful, like we were cut off from the rest of the world. We spent the first part of the day walking along a small trail my grandfather had marked a long time ago. The sun was beginning to set when we reached a small clearing. It wasn't until the shadows between the trees grew longer that I started feeling uneasy. I didn't know why at first, but something about the growing dark made the woods feel heavy. Then I heard it, just a rustling in the bushes behind us. It wasn't the usual sounds you hear in the woods. No birds or squirrels, just a slow, steady movement. It felt like something big was following us, moving just off the trail. I looked up at Dad, but he kept walking, unaware. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder a few times, but I didn't see anything. Still, that rustling kept going. Closer and closer. We walked on, and my nerves kept growing. Finally, we reached the clearing where we planned to rest. The quiet of the woods felt off, like the air itself was holding its breath. I told myself it was just the wind or some animal, but the rustling didn't stop. It seemed to be waiting for us. We decided to head back to the cabin, but something still felt wrong. As we walked back through the trees, I looked to my left and caught a glimpse of something. A figure standing between the trees, barely visible in the fading light. I froze. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. My stomach twisted, a feeling of dread sinking into my bones. We kept walking, my heart pounding hard in my chest. I kept my eyes on the ground, trying not to look back at whatever I'd seen. As we neared the cabin, the feeling of silence around us pressed down even harder. Everything felt wrong, like we were being watched. Dad didn't seem to notice anything. He just walked ahead, not a care in the world. Dad went inside the cabin to start the fire. I stayed outside for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling, but the woods felt too quiet. I felt something lurking just outside my view. Then I heard it again, closer this time. The same rustling, but this time it was louder, like something big was moving through the brush. I felt my heart drop. The air around me seemed thicker, like it was pressing in on me. I turned quickly toward the woods, hoping it was just my imagination. But no. Standing just outside the trees, clearly visible now, was the same figure I had seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes that blended into the shadows. My chest tightened, and I could barely breathe. My legs felt frozen in place, too scared to move. For what felt like forever, we just stared at each other. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the figure stepped back into the darkness of the trees and disappeared. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was run inside the cabin as fast as I could. locking the door behind me. Dad was sitting by the fire, completely unaware of what had just happened. The rest of the night passed in a tense silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, just waiting. Even with the door locked and the fire crackling, it felt like we weren't alone. The next morning, we packed up early and left. We never talked about what happened, but I could tell Dad knew something was off. I didn't want to ask him about it, and I'm pretty sure he didn't want to bring it up either. After that, we never went back to that cabin again. For a long time, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the figure, about the feeling of being watched. I don't know who or what it was, but I never felt safe in those woods again. Every time I try to go camping or hiking, I can't shake the feeling that something might be out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows. Even now, I can still feel the weight of that silence in the woods, the stillness that wasn't quite right. It's a silence that stays with you long after you've left. There are nights when I wake up, feeling like something's right outside my window, and I can't shake the thought that it's still out there, waiting for me to go back. And maybe, just maybe, it's been following me ever since.